Chandrakirti, one of the great pandits in India, said in the middle way, or read it first in English.
Initially adhering to self and I, and then generating attachment to things, this is mine. As a text of
this verse of Chandrakirti says that first, as individuals with a mind, we have adhering to attachment to oneself, and then we have attachment to things that belong to me. So this is the view of the Persian collection of first adhering to I and then adhering to mine. And out of this, Chandrakirti says, so the ones who are walking in a cyclic existence without any control, they're like a bucket that goes up and down in a well. So Rinpoche says that we can think about a baby that has only just come into the world. If we think of this image of a baby that has just come out into the world, so it seems like they get a little bang, and so that they cry. So this first cry sounds like nga in Tibetan, which means me. So the first cry of the baby is like I. So I need food, clothing, I need the things that are mine.
인사 공부다 생이 미투베 장제투베 제기 다다 공부다 생이 미투베 장제투베 제기 다다 어디 있어서 어디 다 공부다 생이 춘장 제골다고 장제투베 제기 다 어디 간데 되었어 공부다 생이 투베스 예 잘 얘기
When we check the way that we cling to, that we relate to ourselves as I, the notion of the self, when we check this clinging up to oneself, so in the previous teaching, we said that we can look at different ways in order to try to identify what the self is, what the I is. The first one is what is this I? So this is an I which is outside of our aggregate. So we have, for example, the body and mind aggregate. So acknowledging, recognizing oneself, which is permanent, unitary, and independent, is actually an attempt to find oneself that exists in a particular way, which is different than the aggregates. So this self is something which is invented, which is made up in particular philosophical schools. It isn't something that we believe in, this permanent, unitary, independent self. So by practicing particular schools of thought, we begin to believe in it. So this is one object of negation. The other object of negation is called self-sufficient, substantially existent self, which is discordant with the characteristics of the aggregates. So when Rinpoche taught the course of the two truths, he quoted a verse that was taken from one of Dharmakirti's texts, in which Dharmakirti says that if we had the opportunity to change the body, where the body is, let's say, quite paralyzed, or that the hands or the legs do not work properly. So having such a weak body that we cannot use. And then we meet a doctor, and the doctor gives us the option to change this paralyzed body in a new and young body in its bloom. So it's not only young and vigilant, but we can also attain many things with such a body. So probably we will look at our body and then and go with the advice of the doctor to change our body for a younger body. or independence on a particular physical condition, that the body gets older and the mind is not as clear as it used to be. And we find that it is difficult for us to think because of lack of clarity. If we were given the opportunity to change the current mind with a different mind, which is clearer, which is sharper, with great willingness, we would do so. We would swap our mind. So when we negate the self, we negate the self which exists by its own power and has characteristics which are different than the characteristics of the aggregates. Rinpoche thinks that if we imagine this situation of having a self, it is one entity with the aggregates. That means that we do not negate a self which exists in a different of the aggregates, but a self which is single entity with the aggregates. So with this thought, if we could change our body for a younger body, and if we could change the mind for a clearer mind, so this self, which is one with the aggregates, which is unitary, which exists in a materialistic way, which with its own power, that has got characteristics that are different from the aggregates. So this is another object of negation, a self which is different from the aggregates. And the third object of negation is a self or an I which exists by its own power, but is suitable, has got the same characteristics as the aggregates, and works together with them like a master and a servant. So this self is not separate from the aggregates, but is one entity with the aggregates of body and mind. But when we think, for example, today I have a project, something which I need to do. I need to activate the body in a particular way. So we think of a kind of a plan. We say it in details, what the different things we need to do. And then we have the feeling of the I, of the body. So it's like the I is the master and the body is like the servant. So this I is a self which exists by its own power or nature, and has a connection with the aggregates like a master and servant. So this is the third object of negation of the self.
대민데스 어디 차기 말이 대민데스 난지 생기기 나이 진술로 홍보치 컨버터 나티 나가 비차비치 됐나 추치고 갑이야 나 추치고 무슨 남자 라인 수수 유튜브 보는 나이 남시가 마다 그거가 뭐 예매체 나와 시작도 마도 지기 갑티디 마도 공부 나시 에네 요것도 남시 디요고네 근데 그래서 거기로 와 맞추기로 기기 소자가 용과도 단단 쓰인도 근데 소자가 용과도 지다 준거 qabla 나 공부 나는 이래 나와 미쳐비 치를 스타 근데 마다 공부니 뭐 예매도 나 저수시도 봐 다티 링하고 나 링하고 쳐도 와 어디 가게 나
So when we search the way of what we want to negate, so the object of negation has got some kind of appearance in our mind. We can think about the three things that we have said. The first self that the Buddha, that Rinpoche described this morning, and the two that we've described now. One which is one entity with the aggregates, which exists by its own power, that have got characteristics that are suitable, that are the same as the aggregates. And when Rinpoche gave the option of changing the body and the mind, we want to see how a self like that appears in the mind. Or the other option, if we think of a plan for today, we think of the self that is like a master that gives orders to the body. We think of a self that exists by its own power, that has got the characteristics which are suitable of the to the aggregates. So then there's another way of checking the self, how it appears to us. So imagine the following situation. Think that when there is somebody without any reason, without a purpose, says that you have stolen something, accuses you of theft, then imagine that someone points at you and says, you have stolen, you are the thief. Think how this would feel, what kind of feeling would arise in your mind. How the self appears to you. When you think it is not me, you're lying. How would the self appear in this moment? When we check this, the self doesn't appear as though it is out of the aggregates, as though it is separated from the aggregates. But the text also says that if the appearance of the self seems as though it is within the aggregates, so it also doesn't exist like this. Because if the appearance is that the aggregates are like a house and the self is the one who lives in the house, so this appearance is wrong. Because we can still go out of the house, we come in and out of the house, and we're actually one entity with the aggregates. And the text says that when we think of the clinging, the innate clinging, the innate grasping at the eye, then the way that the eye appears is not like it is within the body, it is abiding within the mind. In addition, the text says that if we imagine other situations, or like falling into a roaring river, and the river takes us in a very strong flow. Or when there's a dog that's running after us, trying to bite us, so the fear, the fright that arises in the mind. So there's a feeling of an I that arises in this terror, in this feeling of terror. And it isn't that which appears, which feels like the self is among the aggregates. It is a sense of a self which exists as like one entity with the aggregates, but not within the aggregates. So there's still more ways to check what is the self, what is the I. When we think if I am the body, it is obvious that I am not the body. But what about the option of I am the mind? That's because we think of previous life, we talk about it of previous and future lives. So when moving from one birth to the other, we're talking about the main mind that continues from one lifetime to the next lifetime. So what about the option of the self being the I, the self being the mind, for the self that goes from one birth to the other? So the I is also not the main mind, because if, for example, if we think of ourselves in this current life, Rinpoche said, for example, his name is JHADO. So when he received this name JHADO, is it optional that the mind is JHADO, so the name was given to the mind, and is JHADO continuing from this life to the next life? So the text says, if you think it exists only on the basis of the mind, It is not, because the term a human is only mind. It is inadmissible. So a person is not only a mind. This is something we cannot accept. Even if we're called in a particular name in this life, JHADO, or whatever your name is, this name was not given to the mind, and it doesn't continue beyond this life. So the self is not the mind. So let's go back to the body. If we think of someone who's coming towards us, it might be someone old, and a thought will come in our mind. I see someone old in front of me. Oh, this is my father, this is my mother, this is my friend. So we recognize someone according to the shape of their body. So what about the option being the shape of the body? Is the self the shape of the body? So we can recognize someone just by the shape of their body. Still, we can negate the self being the shape of the body, because the shape of the body has got. We have it in this current life, but this body has not come from the previous life, and it is not something that we will take with us to our future lives. It is only relevant for this current life. So the text says that if we think of the I on the basis as the basis of the body, this is not correct, because I have come into this life from previous lives, and after this life I will take another breath. So think about it like that. So we need to find the object of negation in a way that, in an impossible way, that this is what we're negating, the impossible way that the self exists. So we search for it in different ways that the I appears in our mind in different situations, and by investigating, we can see whether the I truly abides or truly exists in this way. And if it doesn't in this way, we negate the object of negation. So the text says that, in short, when you seek it repeatedly in this way, it sometimes seems as if it appears on the mind. So there are different situations that the I can appear. It sometimes appears that the self exists like on the basis of the mind. Sometimes it appears as if it exists on the body, on the basis of the body. And sometimes the various appearances dawn as if it appears in the upper of lower parts of the body, or inside or out. So the I seems as though it exists in different parts of the body. Rinpoche said that in the last weekend teaching, he taught us that sometimes we identify with a particular work that we do. So sometimes we identify with our own sex. We think ourselves as being male or female, man, woman, and this appearance that we have in our mind is as though we can find this label in the basis of the imputation. So we think that the I can be found in us being a man or a woman. So we identify with our body as a male or female. So it feels to us that we can find this self on the basis of designation. And sometimes it happens when we identify with our mind that we can think of ourselves as being a geshe, a professor. So this mind, this thought of thinking I'm a geshe, a professor, it's not in the body, but it is something that exists on the basis of the mind. And there is this appearance that if we search the self as being a professor or a geshe, we'll be able to find something which will show this imputed phenomenon in the basis of designation, which is the mind. And sometimes we identify with a particular action. We think of ourselves as being, let's say, a sculptor, a painter. So when we think of our own profession, we don't think of us being that on the basis of the mind or the body, but rather as the identification of myself with a particular action. So then again, when I search in the basis of designation, that which is imputed, I will not be able to find all these activities that I identify with myself as doing. So the text says that we investigate the self in different ways, and sometimes it appears as if the self arises in the basis of the body, on the action, and different of the mind. But at the end, the measure of ascertaining the object of negation is when the following appearances dawn. So this is like the degree of which we understand the self. The self kind of appears in our mind as being like cemented, like one block, which is something that doesn't change. It's like a cemented notion of the self. With respect to the inseparable aggregates of body and mind, which are mixed, like water and milk, as not being dependent on being one-sidedly imputed by name and conceptions, but rather as being established primordially or existing in and of itself. So we feel that the self isn't just imputed but merely by name from only one side, but rather it exists from its own power, primordially, from time without beginning. So this is how we feel that the self exists.
류지의 가자 뭐 류 남도 세샤의 가자지 샤제 아니 디 투요만 다다르도 투요만 가세 에나 탄주를 루시샤처럼 랑주베 로네메라 나오는 게 셔와마이 유럽 통용의 대륙 부분을 들어서때 류지의 가자래 류 세샤의 가자래 수 센tam에 수진 대신도 들어서는 류지의 가자래 딩고네 타면 수진 대신 동세도 그런 남도 세샤 랑기 체니 그 나온 게 샤워만 유럽 부분을 들어서 류지의 가자래 디 가자 가서 딘진이야 카야 메고 말했어. 단지 딘지 때를 내가 yap을. 또 디지 디도에 나도 소나치 때. 야, 나 차도 개 가서도 가봐. 딱 만들어요. 대답 나시 대답 시험하지. 이거 대답 시험. 생기 대답 뉴스 통화 대답 나시 디딩도 여봤다. 딱디 가리켜서나 유상 남상 타니에 원기 차서 디간데 유업을 좀 맞추고 있잖아요. 디래. 딱 유다 요래. 유다한테 가르쳤으나 타니 샤상 세 디간 유업을 맞고 지기 딱때 짠이 그네 그냥 요마지 딱냥 가래. 어디 또배 원기 샤상을 맞춰 봐. 또배 원기 샤상 세 디기 유랑원이 이거 제가 그만도 이거 제가 말해 세메트로 제가 말해 어다 독스래 됐는가 이렇게나도 좋아지는 거야 알랭이 내가 거라 나오면 고를 쓰기가 그래서 따와 보내지 내가 거라 가장 문제를 따와 이 나오면 뭐야기 좋다 이거 그래서 일레라고 말했어
So we have spoken about some possibilities of identifying the object of negation. Is the object of negation which we want to negate? Is it a self like this or like that? A self which exists on the basis of the body, on the basis of the mind, on the basis of an action. So eventually, when we look at it from the Madhyamika Prasangika, as this text says, the degree for ascertaining the object of negation is when a difference does not occur in terms of whether an I is found or not found from the side of basis of imputation in relation to the two imputations. Just so this united, this self seems as though it does not exist in dependence on mere name, which is done only one-sidedly, but it seems that it is established primordially, existing in and of itself. So this is how we need to identify the object of negation of the self. So one of the scholars of the Gelug tradition, he said that we will be able to identify the object of negation by searching for how the I appears in our mind when we think about ourselves, but also when we come in touch with others. The way the I appears for myself in the mind, it seems as though it's objective. Also, now when you're looking at him and he's looking at you, so it seems in our mind that someone exists objectively. Of course, that when we look at someone else, we do not see their mind, we just see their body, and the appearance is as though he exists objectively in the object itself, in his body or in his basis, on the basis of his body. So we want to ask ourselves, is this image correct? Is this appearance of someone existing objectively on the basis of their body? And is this concordant with reality? Especially if we think about it, for example, when we see someone who's a professor or a geshe, etc. Can we see on the basis of the body someone who's a geshe or professor? Just on the basis of the body of this individual? So in general, when we look at this a certain measure of the object of negation, so this appearance of something that abides objectively within the object itself or by its own power, without being labeled one-sidedly in dependence on a name, on a label, and with the aggregates which are inseparable. So Rinpoche wanted to doubt for a moment whether we're doing this when we look at an external object. So we can think about this in the incidents that we arise in our mind. How will it be when a very strong current of a river leads us along the stream, or when a dog runs after us trying to bite us? How will we feel the eye? So this appearance of the eye, this is the object of negation in this moment. This is an object of negation that seems to exist, the self that seems to exist objectively, which is independent of label in a one-sided way. So as long as we do not identify this object of negation and we adhere to another object of negation, we will not be able to get rid of, to dispel the self-grasping as truly existent. So there are other objects of negations in other schools of thoughts, and we can say that these objects of negation, they are made up, they're spoken about in other philosophical schools of thought. But even if we continue meditating, which negates those objects of negation of the other schools of thought, it will not help us to get rid of the self-grasping. But on the contrary, it could be that our clinging to inherent existence will even become stronger. For example, if we look at an object of a negation of other schools of thought or that they discuss, for example, the Svatantrika, which speaks about a self or an I that exists on its own unique mode of subsistence in a way that is particular, which is unique for itself. Or other schools of thought, the mind only, the Chitta Mantra, which asserts a self as the object and subject, or empty of being a different entity. So when we check this object of negation of the different schools of thoughts, as long as we meditate about this object of negation, we will not be able to get rid of our self-grasping. The only way to do it is identifying correctly, precisely the object of negation, as the Prasangika explains it, which is being something which exists objectively, independently, independent of one-sided imputation on mere name. As long as we don't identify this object of negation, we will not be able to negate the self-grasping. So here we're getting to something which is rather strange, because from one perspective we have particular feelings in different events. We can think of a particular situation, that someone calls us a thief, or when we go along the stream, or when a dog runs after us. So we have an appearance of a self that arises in our mind. And it's not only that it arises in our mind, but we also cling to it as though it truly exists like that in reality. But when we ask ourselves, what am I truly? Is this really how I exist, like I appear, like I feel I do? Do I really exist objectively? When we search for this self, which appears in our mind, we will not be able to find it. We will not, in the basis of designation. So it's rather strange, Rinpoche says, because when we do not investigate it, we just relate to ourselves as being I, and these different situations of going with the current of a river, someone accuses us, a dog runs after us. They exist conventionally, but when we search for them, so Rinpoche wonders, is this clear to you? It is difficult to get to a state that everything is completely clear. It takes a long time, many months, of meditating, contemplating about it, of identifying of getting to the measure of that which we want to negate. It is not something that's going to happen immediately, quickly, but rather a long-term investigation, month after month. It is really not easy.
Kapla, and the Julie Yamaloja tea. The Monatane, and they do not the Chashi Kanega, do said without near Medua. Other than Newmala. They did not see other than a drug forgetting the young, and Raman do said, yeah, touches. That's one. Charge due to the charge with it, how about the charge? The charge had a majesty, mean the tiny one, the charge had majesty, or dig on to less, or take some catcher legends. But the Tundoma town, Tanju of the Parakita, kept chasing, got some kept chasing, or terrace.
Sounds quite complicated, Rinpoche says, but even though when we think about it from the quantum physics, so Rinpoche says it sounds quite complicated, but if we can think about it from the point of view of the quantum physics, it is very similar, and it will be much easier to understand. So eventually, when we try to identify the exact measure of identifying the self, of the object of negation, so we want to negate a self which exists in an objective way with a unification of body and mind, which are indivisible, just like water and milk. This is what we want to negate. By even though the explanation sounds complicated, we can think about it in a simple way. So, for example, if we think about our clothes, is the eye the self? Is the eye the clothes? If we think about it, the things that we're wearing now, being a monk or a lay person, is the eye the clothes that I'm wearing? So then we will investigate and search it. We will divide our clothes into smaller parts. We can investigate them, and on the atom level, we find the self in each one of these parts, even in the atom. So we will not be able to find ourselves in our clothes, and in the same way, we can ask ourselves, can I find a self which exists objectively within the body, on the basis of the body or within the body? So we can do the same process by dividing the body into different parts, checking the atoms and the molecules, and to search within the body this self as it appears to us, as though it exists in the body objectively in a unified mode of the body and mind. So we cannot find something like that. And in addition, Chandrakirti in the supplement to the Middle Way, by relating to what Aryadeva wrote in the 400 verses of the Middle Way of the Madhyamika school of thought. So he says, as we can look at the state that in the afternoon we go outside, and there is a rope that is coiled around itself. So since it is dust, though when we go outside and we see this rope, so immediately we think, oh, that's a snake. There's a snake there. This appears in our mind. So we can say that we impute a label, snake, on the coiled rope. But if we stop a minute and investigate this situation, we analyze it. Is there a snake in the rope that is coiled around itself? So we can divide the rope into parts. We can check it on. We can check each of the atoms, but we will not be able to find snake within the rope. So in the same way, Rinpoche says, even if we're a real snake, could we find a snake on the basis of designation of snake once we break it to parts? Also there we will not be able to find anything that will express, which will show the snake. So what is the difference between a real snake and something which is not a real snake? How can we identify between those two states? How can we identify? How can we distinguish between something that has the function of a snake and something that doesn't have a function of a snake? We can distinguish between this that can function as a snake and which cannot function as a snake only by conventions, the conventions of the world. But we cannot find anything that will have the function of the snake in the basis of designation. So finally, in order to have the function of a snake is something which exists only only on the label, a one-sided label. So this discussion is something that happens not only here, but also between different schools of thoughts in Buddhism. They discuss the way things truly exist. And Madhyamika Prasangika school of thought that asserts mere existence, which is independent on a mere label, on a one-sided way, in a one-sided way. So the different schools of thought, they do not accept this view. They find problems with this reasoning. There is a very vast discussion that happens revolving around this question of the object negation. So this text invites us to investigate that which we want to negate.
타니에 온데 따봐 임베 따데 가래 간제지래 다들 아니 그래도 반대 달에 감 세고 남제 내가 이때 얘네 랑게야나 때네 따봐 얘네 이도 이제 넘버 2기 남제 내가 이때 얘네 랑게야나 때네 따봐 민기 타니에 와 비샤도 때네 따봐 어디니 지금 뭐 좋아 다시 벨라멘트가 똑수체제 우주냐에 뜻하면 말해 어떻게 그거 보고 우주 안에 또 벌다 대박이지 어떻게 이제 배제 나도 보다 빨리 시험 쉬우죠 이게 정말 되게 시합에 초기 때문에 진짜 어디는 주제나 그런 부분이 제가 락사콜 연스다야지 연스다야지 연 뭐니기 주제나 콜 민카르다라스 라고 말해 그 당분이 연 두타스 메리 당분이 두타스 두체 두타 부인은 보면은 지금 민들이 두타스 거기야 따고도 왔어 두스다고도 왔어 두시 뭐니기 주나 되게 샤비 쳐 나도 잘라 강다 카이네 들이야 타니에 두스다고도 왔어 뭐니기 주제나 다둥이야 저거를 이제 야고 쉬우 숨어도 왔어 빼는 말아도 kindergarten 부춘중디 랍다들라 부정돼서 A B C the A다 B다 C다 쓰는 랍부로 그도 맞다고요 부들 다 단단 말아도 이게 도 집집에 가면 이거 코라 랑원에 두대에 소리 A B 랑원에 두대에 소리 토가지 용구요 뭐네 다니서 다 파다 버다 어디는 A 쓰거나 어디는 B 쓰거나 파다 버서 어디 당분에 랑원에 주면 때는 따기 이거 따기 또 두스레 되는 거 알아 이게 좀 되게 샤브 좀 때는 따기 진짜 근데 다 유루요 다 가르를 쓰고 여요를 다 유루 랑원에 수도 주면 그거 여 말이 다 때는 다 대야 민그 타니에 긴 원기차 민그 작수기 원기 아니 여가 좀 어떻게 해야 돼 두스레 내가 감리고 뒤가도 그래서 대적 그걸 싸우고 근데 성문에 다니는 다 민그 타니에 온게 샤서 비가면 또 왜 가서 차도도 와 다을에 니말에 다을까 가가 또 가서 차도도 와 야또 왜 가서 차도면 야 비가 이제 센터가 짓고 와 이 양진용 같은 거 보여야 돼. 직대 잡을 꿈도 말하지. 어떤 것도 직대 타니기 타고 꿈도 라기로 갔다. 같이 통화한테 직대는 좀 대체로. 직대는 들어온 거를 견주 먹고 치고 때 들어온 거 직대 타니기 타고 있길래 다가라는 게 샤방하고 그래 가봐 되는 말이야. 직대 잡을 꿈도 말하지. 어떤 것도 랑기야라 때는 딱 그래 indicating a balance the huge water kapit tuk shodu ta huge tabu gore da dove da sa ba mingi tani ni wonge sha sa ni ni ya chaje ki naksha thamse demo chen sangyen ga ma jo thu ya to
Nagarjuna, the great scholar, said in the Ratna Valley, the precious garland. So he said on page 24, it says that the individual is not the earth, is not the water, is not the wind, is not the fire, and is not all of these together. So Nagarjuna explained this. in the way that we can investigate the self to try and find it on the basis of designation. So we said that we label the self on the, for example, on the 6 elements. And if we find the self among the 6 elements, we will not be able to find it. So we have the 4 elements among these 6, which is, we can see that the self is not the earth, is not the water, is not the wind, is not the fire, and it's also not space, and it is not the main mind. It's not the consciousness, and it's not all of these together. So this means that the self cannot be found. We cannot find the self in the basis of designation of the self. So there are also other methods and different explanations of how to seek. Can the self be found? For example, there is a method of searching for the self in 7 different ways. The 7-fold rational analysis. So we search for our particular way that the self exists with these 7 ways. So with this investigation, we see that if the self existed in an objective way, by its own power, independent of mere label, but in an objective way in reality, so we'd be able to find it in one of these 7 ways. But we cannot find it in each one of these 7 ways. So eventually the self exists only independent on a mere label. So in Buddha Palita discussed it in one of his texts. Before we speak about that, Rinpoche said that it's not that we're only dealing with this subject with Tibetan lamas, but if we look at Nagarjuna's view and Buddha Palita, Chandrakirti's view, the 3 of them that according to the Prasangika view, they say that if we try and seek the self in the basis of designation, we will not find anything that represents it. But nevertheless it exists. It exists on mere label, dependently on mere label. So Buddha Palita said in one of his texts, if the self was existent by its own nature, by way of its own entity, then we wouldn't need to give it a label. For example, if we think of a newborn baby, if they were existent just with their own identity, by their own nature, if this baby was John or Mary, so we wouldn't need to call the child by its own name. Everyone would know that this baby is John or Mary without the need to label them as anything. Just by their own nature, that's what they would be. So this is what Buddha Palita said. If things exist by their own nature, by their own entity, there is no need to label them. Everyone would know what was their name without a need of giving them a name. This is what Buddha Parita said in his text. And also the Dalai Lama, when he explains this subject, he says that we can explain it in another way. When little children in kindergarten, they learn the ABC. So we use particular like a dice that each one of the sides of the dice has got a different letter. And then we show them this side is A, that one is B, the other one is C, and then with this game we teach the young child the ABC. But later on, when we just type on a computer, so the letters, they come on our screen as though they exist from their own side, as though it is A that exists from its own side as A, in its own entity, independent on us labeling it as A or B or C. So if we think of the way that things exist, we say that even though they appear to exist from their own side, in their own entity, by their own nature, they do not exist in this objective way, even though they appear to. So these things exist only independent on label, independence on name. So there's a lot of effort that we need to invest while thinking and meditating about this, on the view of emptiness, in order to understand it. It isn't an easy subject, but this is the direction that we want to take. This is what we want to see, that things exist independence on label. They do not have an objective existence. So then we ask ourselves the question, if things exist on mere dependence on mere label, does that mean I can call the moon sun, and the sun, can I call it a moon? And that's how they will exist? Because they don't have an objective existence, I can call them whatever I want. I can swap the names. Is this what they will be? So within this discussion, the different philosophical schools of thought, they explain how we can still call conventionalities accepted truths without them losing their meaning, so that we don't call the sun moon and the moon sun, so that we cannot call anything anything. So there are ways of not losing this kind of correlation between the word and the object. So Chandrakirti said on the supplement to the middle way, so the way that we engage in this is without losing the conventions, the worldly conventions that we use. And he said that the Buddha said, I do not argue with the world, but the world argues with me. So the Buddha said that he is not going against the conventions of the world, but it's the world that discusses the view of emptiness. So from on the one hand, we're saying that if we check the way phenomena exist of the self and on the basis of designation, and we ask ourselves, can we find anything that represents the self on the basis of designation? So that we cannot. So therefore, we say that they exist in dependence on mere labeling. So this is dependent arising. So on the one hand, we have the way of existence of phenomena which are merely labeled, independence on mere labeling. And then on the other side, we have on the scales, we have the ability of this, the functioning of this phenomena. So there's the agent, there's the object, the agent, and the action. So there's the agent, the object of the action, and the action itself. They all have to be on a scale in a balanced way. So sometimes one of the scales goes higher and the other one goes lower. So we need to balance this. We cannot say that when we say that things exist on mere labeling, independence on mere labeling, but still they can function. There is an action, there's an agent, and there's an object of the action. Do you have any questions? We have 13 or 14 minutes. So there seem to be 2 questions from before. So we have only a few minutes. And do you have any questions? Rinpoche asked. So it could be that you have questions as to what came up in the discussion, and also someone left me 2 notes with questions. So what should we do?
Okay, what is the Okay.
So Rinpoche is asking the shorter question.
Okay.
It's the shortest but the most complicated, Yaki-san. You know? What's the consciousness and what's the definition of it? Yaki saying it's complicated actually. So the mind is an entity that has an ability to understand a particular object. And it is an entity of merely knowing and only clear.
It's an entity of mere cognition and clarity.
So we can say that the answer is very simple. There is an entity that has a particular object, which is merely knowing and mere clarity. So we can say that the answer is clear, but when we look at the meaning of only knowing, mere knowing, and mere clarity, so at the beginning it is difficult to comprehend what this means. So then we start to investigate it from our personal experience. So this is what the text about Mahamudra that we're engaging in now. So it says that when we do meditation, we shall not stay in the past, not think about the past, shall not engage in thoughts about the future or about things that are happening right now, but rather investigate the mind, not to investigate the thoughts, and to try to identify these aspects of mere knowing, of mere clarity. At the beginning it is difficult, but occasionally we have some clarity where we realize, we recognize what is knowing, what is mere knowing, what is mere clarity. At the beginning, it arises occasionally, this clarity of understanding. But as we meditate more and more, these moments of clarity will arise, so that we have a more long-term understanding of the nature of the mind. So, this text, the Mahamudra text, first begins with identifying the nature of the mind, which is more on a coarse level. So first we want to recognize the conventional nature of the mind. So the mind is this entity which has an object and is mere knowing and mere clarity. So Rinpoche gave for an example a robot. Can we say that a robot is this entity of mere knowing and mere clarity? It's hard to say that about a robot, something which is produced, but we can say it about the mind, because the mind, we develop this understanding in meditation. So time has ended, now we'll do dedication.